Hey everybody, welcome back to the video only version of the Horror Trans podcast. I have subsequently killed the audio portion temporarily, at least until I figure out how to upload videos to my podcast um, provider. Because with my work schedule and everything else, I just don't have the time or mental energy anymore to devote to extracting the audio out of these videos and uploading separately. So, as of this moment, the audio episodes are on hold, which I haven't done one in like a month. Anyways, I do apologize for that if you are watching this and you would prefer to listen to it on Spotify or whatever. So, as is always the case, let's start off with what have I watched recently? I watched a lot of stuff in the past few days. Some of this I may have already talked about. I can't remember, but it's on the list. So either I didn't take it off from last week or I didn't do a video last week. I don't remember. And I'm not going to go back and watch last week's video to refresh my memory. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to run through the list. I did watch Cabin Fever. I've already done my horror trans review of it. Um, I believe that video is already live, so you can go check it out if you haven't already. I started Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and I'm going to be honest, once they got to the graveyard scene and they got to the mushy bodies, I threw up in my mouth um, and turned the movie off and have not gone back to it. And I'm probably going to write that one off as a no, not for me. So I apologize for that. This is a movie I don't think I have the stomach to get through. So I won't be reviewing Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 anytime soon. So I apologize for that, but that grossed me out. I literally puked. I'm not watching a movie that's going to make me puke. Because if they're willing to do that in the first 10 minutes of the movie, I'm not willing to risk watching the rest of the movie. I'm pretty sure I already mentioned this because Valentine's Day was last week. I think it was last week. But on Valentine's Day for date night, me and my girlfriend watched She's All That. Still holds up. I still love it. Um, for a Patreon bonus video that I did, I think also last week. So again, I might have already mentioned this. I rewatched Gremlins, and I talked a lot about the problems that movie has that either I've never noticed before or I just dismissed and just shrugged it off. I also rewatched Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, because I was in the mood, and it's still my favorite of the Halloween franchise. And I just wanted to watch a slasher, and it's easily accessible. I also watched, as is often the case, I rewatched, I should say, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the original from 1984. I don't watch it once a month, but pretty damn close. And last night, or the night before, I can't remember. It was either last night or the night before. I did record myself watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which I'd already seen and done a review of, but I just wanted to rewatch it for the Patreon bonus commentary. So you can get my reactions and thoughts to the movie on my Patreon video by going to patreon.com/Stephanie Brie. That's BRI. And you can hear me talk about it. Now, news and rumors. I've got a lot to go through, and there might be one or more trailers to watch. If that is the case, I will probably turn the audio down to avoid copyright strike because my headphones, which I have had since the early 2000s, are in rough shape and they're not functioning um, at 100%. So I'm not going to be using the headphones it's probably time I replace them, but I don't know. So let's go ahead and open up the news sites. I got some articles already ready to go. This first one comes from Bloody Disgusting. That's bloody-disgusting.com. And it basically says, I'm gonna read the headline and skim through the article. Doug Bradley, famous for playing Pinhead in the Hellraiser franchise, says he would love to play an older, darker Pinhead in a Scarlet Gospels movie. Now, Bloody Disgusting has an interview with Doug Bradley where this information came from. So you should definitely go to their website and read the entire interview for yourself. I'm not going to steal their content and read it to you because that would be scummy. But I will read one quote. He says, "That would be the perfect book into my life in latex, if I can put it that way," he says. So interesting that he actually wants to do a very specific story that hasn't been adapted yet, to my knowledge. But there's a really good interview in there. So definitely go to Bloody Disgusting and check that out. Also coming from Bloody Disgusting, this one's interesting. I like this. It says that Lionsgate is reportedly planning a, we'll just say reboot, I guess, or remake or whatever, sequels, whatever, new entries, um, I guess, in of American Psycho, which I'm down for that, and The Dead Zone. Full disclosure, I've never seen The Dead Zone. I have watched with my mom because she's a fan of it a handful of episodes of the TV series with Anthony Michael Hall. I was not a fan. I've never seen the movie. It's on my list only because, it's a horror movie that I've heard of and it's Stephen King. So I am likely to watch any and everything Stephen King adapted. Just because I do like enough Stephen King stuff, I'm willing to take a chance. But, anyways, American Psycho sounds interesting. I don't know if it's going to be a sequel or a reboot. Let's see what it says. It says Lionsgate is plotting a new American Psycho movie and showing interest in a remake of The Dead Zone. Blah, blah, blah. All right, nothing interesting in that other than, just, hopeful stuff. Looking at Dread Central, it does say that The Crow, a new movie in the Crow franchise, or reboot, starring Bill Skarsgård, who's known as playing It the Clown or Pennywise the Clown in the most recent It remake, the It Chapter 1, It Chapter 2. This reboot is set to appear this June. So see if it has um, a release date. Looks like June 7th of 2024. Blah, blah, blah. The remake looks to follow the same trajectory as the original, following Bill Skarsgård as the Crow, and no trailer is yet available. Blah blah blah. Okay, so that's coming later this year. The Crow is an interesting movie I will talk about in the future. Coming from iHorror.com, this is a trailer that we're probably going to watch. Well, I'll watch and you'll watch me react to it. The movie is called Boy Kills World, and the trailer is with Bill Skarsgård and is being produced by Sam Raimi. It says produced by, not directed by. So let's see if it says who's the director. Bill Kills World is what happens when some of the biggest names in the horror industry decide to rip about the young adult chosen one genre. Oh dear. Blah, blah, blah. The special child has to rise up against the violent, oppressive overlords. Blah, blah, blah. It's compared to the Hunger Games. Sam Raimi is a producer on this film, and Moritz Moore is directing. It says there's a trailer. So here's the trailer. I'm going to go ahead and click. Well, let me turn the volume down so we don't get copyright strike. And let's hit play. Okay, this does not look like a horror movie. This looks like an action movie. Maybe sci-fi action. I see an arcade. So, Ready Player One vibes. Looks like it's reminiscent of the Hunger Games, which the article mentioned. Uh, it's a Running Man type game where breakfast cereal mascots murder kids. What? Yeah, I'm getting Ready Player One vibes. It looks like we're going to have a training montage of him learning martial arts and toning his body. A lot of machine guns on his back, so this definitely looks more like an action movie than a horror movie. But Sam Raimi's producing it, so I guess it'll have horror elements. Horror action is an underrated, underutilized genre. We get a lot of horror, sci-fi horror, and horror comedies and other meshes of with the horror blending, but we don't get a lot of horror action adventure movies. We've had some. I would put The Mummy, 1999, in that camp. Maybe Jurassic Park, the original, but not too many other movies. Bill Skarsgård, he's got a sword and a motorcycle. Looks like there's going to be a lot of one-liners. I don't recognize any of those names. Yep, definitely one-liners. Boy Kills World. I'm assuming it's rated R, but I haven't seen a rating yet. Did it say? I don't see a rating. It didn't say. All right, so that's enough of that. Does not look interesting. I'm going to be honest. Also from iHorror.com, Barbara Crampton is um, the newest DLC for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video game. Barbara Crampton is a horror icon that I will definitely be doing a video on in the future. Um, I follow her on Twitter. She's pretty cool. It says she will be making an appearance in the game's newest DLC. She has told Fangoria that she'll be added in the game as a new mom character. Um, blah, blah, blah. All right, so another horror icon from the 80s joining in another love letter to horror fans. Awesome. So if you have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video game or plan on getting it, that's a nice little tidbit for you. Okay, so this one comes from Horror Society, and it's another trailer that I definitely want to watch, and it's called Peter Rabbit. Um, this is a horror take on the Legend of Peter Rabbit. Rabbit, I guess. Blah blah blah. Directed by S.J. Evans, written by Adam Stephen Kelly. It is UK genre production studio Shogun Films, starring Guy Henry, Janine Nerissa Southcott and Johnny Palmiero, and a whole bunch of new people. Um, it's a slasher, it sounds like. Buckets of blood, inventive kills, and practical effects, blah, blah, blah. All right, let's watch the trailer. I'm going to turn this one up a little bit. All right, we're seeing a bunch of girls die. Where's the volume button? Oh, it's at full volume. All right. We got our cast of characters. Oh, a hanging. Oh, I don't like that. We got sex. We got drugs. So typical slasher fare, of course. And we have he came. Is it a guy in a Peter Rabbit costume? He sawed SAWED. Yep, chainsaw. It's a guy in a Peter Rabbit mask. It is not a rabbit. And he conquered. So your typical masked serial killer slasher. It looks like there's two um killers in this movie though. So reminiscent of Scream, only they're both on screen at the same time. Interesting. That one looks like it could be fun. All right, Peter Rabbit, another in the long line of public domain horror slashers. Coming from Screen Rant, this report says Prey 2 has finally been confirmed, and let's see. Prey 2 is officially confirmed to be in the early stages of development at 20th Century Studios. Amber Midthunder is in talks to reprise her role as Naru, the skilled warrior protecting her tribe against an evolved alien predator. The studio is currently focusing on Badlands, a standalone Predator movie with Dan Trachtenberg returning to write and direct. Um, nope, nobody. No other information. Just that it's. Is it going to be also on Hulu, or is this going to get a theatrical release? Does it say? Nope, I don't see any other information. It doesn't say if it's going to get a theatrical release or if this is going to be on Hulu. Or I guess Disney Plus. I don't know what's going on with Hulu. All right, next one. Also from Screen Rant, last story. Evil Dead spinoff director reveals hopeful release window. Co-writer director Sebastian Vanacek hopes to start filming the Evil Dead spinoff in late 24 or early 25. It is expected to have a Halloween 2025 release date, according to the director, and he has been given 100% creative freedom by Sam Raimi for the new installment. Plot details remain unknown, blah, blah, blah. It has been described as being a spin off, taking a page out of taking a different story in the Deadite driven universe. Raimi is producing, along with his creative partner, Robert Tappert, and it will be Ghost House Pictures. Da, 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 and he's describing the movie as nasty. Okay, that's all we have time for news and rumors. Some pretty good stuff. Let's get into our topics. Our first topic is torture porn. Now, torture porn was at one point in time the label that was attached to all horror movies in the 80s, specifically slashers and splatter films. But since the introduction of Saw and later Hostel and a bajillion copycats, the label has been, um, in modern times, applied to movies that are basically, well, we could say body horror, I guess, where the focus is not on the story, but on the creative kills. Um, as a genre, torture porn is has similarities to the slasher genre in that the kill count is more important, or the kills are more important than everything else. And similar to splatter films, where the kills are more creative than your typical horror movie, torture porn gets a bad rep in the broader film um, community, as in those who are not horror fans. But horror fans themselves tend to be, in my experience, divided on torture porn, including myself. I am of the mindset that story is not necessarily important to a horror movie. Sometimes you want good scares, sometimes you want good kills, sometimes you want good characters, and sometimes you want a good story. But a good horror movie does not have to have any combination of these. It only has to have one or more elements of these for it to be enjoyable. So, if it's a good story but everything else sucks, it could still be enjoyable. If the story and acting suck but the kills are good, it can still be enjoyable. An example would be Terrifier. Now, Terrifier and its cousin, All Hallows Eve, two franchises that I would put in the splatter category, not slasher, could be argued as examples of torture porn. But again, there are nuances. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this topic discussion, Saw is the flagship torture porn franchise. And we all know Saw is pretty much where it's at. This is the template. So when you're looking for a torture porn film, it's a safe bet that you're going to get what you're looking for if you're going to watch a Saw film. Now, Touristas, I would put in this camp, as well as the Hostel franchise. Um, I cannot definitively, without going to Wikipedia, give you any more examples because this is not a subgenre I am a fan of. So when I see a movie gets labeled as torture porn, I usually lose interest in that movie. And I am not a fan of the Saw franchise by and large. Have I enjoyed a Saw film or two? Perhaps. I may have already reviewed a couple of them on this channel. More reviews might be coming. They might not. I'm not saying yay or nay. All I'm saying is we'll see. Based on my reaction to Hostel and my indifference to Eli Roth's obsessive, excessive sexual content, there's a high probability I do not explore further into the Hostel franchise. Um, this damn thing won't light. So don't expect me to talk too much about Hostel. But let's go ahead and dig into Saw. So, if you're not familiar with Saw, the franchise is known for its kills. But unlike Jason or Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, the kills are not um incidental. They're not like the killer isn't using what's available in the environment around them to kill people. The killer is actually designing and implementing elaborate mechanical traps that do the killing for the killer, not necessarily absolving him or her, or them in some cases, of the guilt of murder, but in such a way as the victims are not necessarily dying at the hands of the killer. Um, it's complicated, but you know, if your actions cause another person's death, you can be responsible for that death. Just saying. I don't know if these saw killers, if if they were arrested and I don't know, um, prosecuted in a court of law, if they could be charged with murder or manslaughter. It's very, I don't know, very muddy, which is one of the things I don't like about the Saw franchise because it's trying to be highbrow and ask or raise ethical questions, but it really comes off as pretentious and arrogant, and I just don't care for that. I have in the past used the word hipster as a derogatory um, phrase to those who think they're better than the rest of us. These tend to be people, in my estimation, that are, this is a tangent, that are not fans of X, Y, or Z, but they latch onto the superficial elements of the culture of X, Y, or Z to, have the appearance of being whatever X, Y, or Z is. So they're not gamers, but they'll wear a T-shirt that has a picture of a generic gamepad that doesn't belong to any video game console because they think it makes them look cool to gamers. Things like that. Um, Hipsters are responsible for the Saw franchise, in my estimation, and they can have it as far as I'm concerned. Now, I use it as a derogatory term, but mostly because hipsters, by and large, tend to think they're better than others. And they use shit terms like highbrow cinema or elevated horror. Fuck off. There's nothing wrong with taking an academic approach to cinema, and this includes horror. I'm all for that. I studied film in college. I had to take an academic approach to film to get my education. And, I do review movies, which are critical looks at films. Although I'm not, God damn it, I'm not necessarily, I'm trying to get my slippers on and I can't fucking do it. God damn it. Where the hell is it? My feet are cold. It snowed last night. Um, However, I'm not necessarily taking an academic approach in my reviews. I'm usually taking a very simplistic approach. Did I like the movie enough to buy it? Is basically my view. If not, that putting a movie so I'll explain this. Um, if I rate a movie as a buy, that doesn't mean it's a good movie. It just means it's a movie I think is worthy of owning or having in your collection. If I rate a movie as a rent, that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It just, to me, it means like, yeah, this isn't one you want on your shelf. So, I don't have anything else to say about torture porn. Let's talk about zombies. Now, I have zombies on my list of future horror icons to do. I don't remember if I've already done a zombie horror icon or not. If I have, I'm probably going to repeat some of the stuff I said in that video. If I haven't, then you can expect that video to probably repeat some of the stuff that I'm going to say here. I'm of two mindsets when it comes to zombies. And when I say zombies, we're talking about ghouls as conceptualized by George A. Romero in Night of the Living Dead. So we're talking about flesh eating, reanimated corpses, Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, The Walking Dead, etc. 28 weeks, days later, those kind of zombies. They don't have to be undead or reanimated undead. Uh, they basically just have to be flesh eaters, hordes of flesh eaters, mindless flesh eaters, not typical cannibals. So I want to make that clear. So here's my two. I'm of two minds when it comes to zombies. I like zombies as a horror trope and as a villain, or even as a MacGuffin in a, there's your academic word of the day, in a horror film. They make good um, antagonists. Because as presented in zombie media, the hordes of mindless zombies are next to impossible to overcome because they outnumber the living, usually in what is referred to as a zombie apocalypse. Um, so as a monster, as a movie monster, I'm all for zombies. They make interesting movie monsters, not TV shows. The Walking Dead can suck it and fuck off, and all of its spin-offs. I'm not even interested. Zombies are terrifying for a lot of reasons because one, they look like us, but they're not us. And they want to eat us because they just see us as food. They don't see us as, the same species as them, which is weird because we don't eat zombies. Don't eat zombies, please. Even if you're a cannibal, don't eat zombies because they are usually rotten flesh. My sister's about to come in the door, but I'm not stopping the video. So, my second um, take on zombies is I do not buy the zombie apocalypse as a viable scenario. And I've said this before because hypothetically, in a zombie outbreak, you usually have one or a handful of people, usually a small group of people in a lab, no more than 10 people get infected with the zombie virus. I'm supposed to believe that this corpse that is dragging its broken ankle across the pavement is going to walk up to me, and I'm just going to be a dumbass and stand there and let it bite me in sufficient numbers to erase the human population? No, that's not believable because nobody is dumb enough to stand there and let a zombie bite them. And every single human, including a 12-year-old child, has the physical muscle strength to overpower a corpse that has no fucking functional muscles. So I'm not scared of zombies in real life because I know I'm going to be in my car 3 miles down the road 20 minutes before that zombie can get close enough to bite me. So zombie apocalypse will never happen because nobody is dumb enough to get bit by a zombie. Now, zombie movies post-apocalypse are scary because everybody's a zombie and you can't outrun 100 zombies that are surrounding you, but we'll never get to that point where there's 100 zombies because you're going to quarantine the first zombie you see, and hey, now we don't spread the zombie virus anymore. We're done. Game over. We won. So, zombie movies, to me, don't fall under fantasy in the traditional sense that they're fairy tale, but they are. They're not realistic and they're not believable because it could never happen, even in the logic of the movies that they're presented in, because it always starts with one person gets infected and it just spreads. Well, if it can only spread through a bite, that's the only method it has of spreading, it's never going to spread because nobody is ever going to stand there and let a zombie bite them. Never. You could grab a chair. You could grab a fucking coffee mug. Anything you can grab in your immediate surrounding would make a sufficient weapon to knock down a corpse. That's not to mention the fact that even if the zombie virus could reactivate the brain, if the muscles are not consuming calories, which they're not when they're eating flesh, because there's not enough calories in human flesh to sustain their muscles, they do not have the muscle strength to stand up, walk, and bite in the first place. They're literally fucking corpses. Now, we have seen, especially in The Walking Dead, zombies that have no muscles. They're just basically skeletons with blood. Sometimes they've got pieces of rotten flesh on them. Walking around with no muscles? I don't buy that either. That's magic. That's fantasy. That's fairy tale. That's not what is presented in the zombie movies that we've seen. Even the supposedly realistic ones, like the Resident Evils, where it's a virus. Again, the people in that movie get overtaken because they stand there and let the zombies bite them. You can literally see it happen. But in real life, you're not going to stand there and let a crazy person bite you. Nobody is ever going to do that. There will never be a zombie apocalypse. Never. So you can stop preparing for it. It cannot happen. All right, next topic, Tales from the Crypt. Hello. Recording. Okay. So Tales from the Crypt is two things. It is or was at one point in time a comic book published by EC Comics. But nobody remembers that because that was published in the 40s. And that company went out of business before any of us were born. What people remember of Tales from the Crypt, which I'm going to talk about here, is the live action television anthology series that I believe, but don't quote me on this, was produced by HBO, question mark, that came out in either the late 80s or early 90s, somewhere in that ballpark. Tales from the Crypt, like I said, is a horror anthology television series. Now, the way it works is you have this haunted mansion, I'll call it, that down in the basement is a crypt. And inside the crypt, there's, coffins and, skeletons and horror paraphernalia. You have a animated skeleton called the Crypt Keeper or the Keeper. And the Crypt Keeper tells a story, usually a ghost story. These are, well, not necessarily ghost story, but scary story, horror story. They are very reminiscent of episodes of The Twilight Zone, the same kind of stories you would get in The Twilight Zone. They can, and sometimes are, scary, but sometimes they're more analytical. They're movies that, or episodes, they're stories that make you think, what would that be like? What would I do in that scenario? Or, God, that would suck. I hope that doesn't happen to me. Type of situations. The stories can and sometimes do, but don't necessarily have to, have a supernatural element. They do sometimes, but don't necessarily have to, have a killer. Some episodes, nobody dies. Because death isn't the only thing that terrifies humans. So, an episode could center on a different fear, like spiders, or public speaking, or whatever. Now, as an anthology, I will say Tales from the Crypt is entertaining enough and enjoyable as a horror franchise. But from a going back to I would say an intellectual perspective, not as effective as the Twilight Zone. They do or can the intended purpose is to make you think, but most of the time you get done with an episode of the Twilight Tales from the Crypt, and you're like, okay, that was fun for 30 minutes. Let's do something else. You get done with an episode of the Twilight Zone, and you're haunted by that episode of the Twilight Zone for the rest of your life. So I would say Tales from the Crypt is not necessarily an effective horror delivery method. Um, as a TV series, it's enjoyable. I watched a significant amount of episodes of the Tales from the Crypt. I keep mixing it up with Twilight Zone. I apologize. Tales from the Crypt. That I would say, yeah, it's good. It's good enough to seek out. Uh, but I will say this: it's dated, and some of the stuff that you're gonna see in Tales from the Crypt has been reimagined more effectively in modern times as movies or TV shows. So I would argue Tales from the Crypt is more of a historical anomaly, as in it's like, it's a time capsule. It's worth investigating if you're interested in the history of horror and the history of horror television and horror anthologies. But as far as actual good storytelling, I don't know. I would say anything that was done in Tales from the Crypt has been done better by other people. Now, I try to keep these episodes under 60 minutes thereabouts. We're at 42 minutes right now. So, I do have enough time to talk about my final topic, serial killers. So, serial killers are people, they're basically pattern killers, meaning they kill multiple people. I don't know what the specific number is. I would say three or more is the generally accepted definition. And there's a pattern to their kills. Um, Serial killers are somewhat fascinating as a subject of horror movies and storytelling because there's the question of what would push a person into doing these things. Now there are ample examples of true crime and documentaries and docudramas and crime investigator shows like CSI and NCIS, etc., that deal with real life or fictionalized reimaginings of real life serial killers. So there are plenty of human people in real life that have turned to serial killers. Now, in horror, which is what we discuss on this channel, serial killers can still be a common trope, most notably in, as I've talked about a bajillion times, the slasher genre. Whether or not you consider John Kramer from, Jigsaw from the Saw movies a serial killer is debatable. But let's talk about a handful of notable serial killers in horror movies, some who have entire franchises, and a couple who don't. Let's start with the big names. The biggest name I would argue in horror serial killers is the infamous Shape himself, Michael motherfucking Myers. I'm not going to talk about Michael Myers too much, but he's a good case study of a serial killer that has no motive. He just killed his sister one day and went on a killing spree pretty much from that day forward, killing everyone he could get his hands on. Now, initially, not to get off too far of a tangent, the Shape was envisioned as a babysitter stalker. So I guess his sister was not a good babysitter and he killed her for whatever reason and decided he equates all babysitters with her and that's why he kills babysitters. However, that angle was quickly dropped in favor of a sinister force going after the members of his bloodline, which was also subsequently dropped in favor of a madman who just kills everybody in sight. So there are multiple versions and interpretations of Michael Myers, but in all instances, he fits the classification of a serial killer. The next, I would say, famous one, maybe as famous, is Jason Voorhees. Now, we're going to set aside Pamela Voorhees because technically she was a serial killer. She was only in the first movie, and her motivation was just to keep that campsite clear of counselors. So, as long as there's no counselors invading that campsite, she has no reason to kill. Jason, on the other hand, his motivation is to kill teenagers specifically because in the lore, it was a teenage camp counselor that let him drown at the hands of the bullies who pretty much chased him into the lake, depending on which version of the story you're going to go by. His motivation is teenagers are bad, therefore they must all die. And the only time he kills adults is when they're in his way, preventing him from getting to the teenagers. Now, we have not seen Michael Myers kill children, but we have seen him go after children. Jason, on the other hand, has a somewhat moral code in that he'll kill teenagers and or adults. He does not specifically kill children. The next famous serial killer we're going to talk about, you can't say that about because he specifically targets children, including teenagers, but not just teenagers. He'll go after children, toddlers, or whatever, babies even. His name is Freddy Krueger. He's the villain or protagonist, depending on which film you're watching, of the A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Now, he has appeared in two movies that do not bear the A Nightmare on Elm Street name, Wes Craven's New Nightmare and Freddy vs. Jason, one of which exists entirely outside the franchise, and another one that exists in more or less an alternate timeline that could be related to the original timeline but doesn't have to be. Freddy Krueger is also a pattern killer. He's a serial killer whose method is basically to use dreams, because he exists as a dream demon, to kill kids using their fears, the things they're afraid of. Now, alive, serial killer Freddy Krueger targeted underage children, preteens and below. We don't know their ages, but judging by pictures and incidental, newspaper clippings and things we've seen from the movies, we can safely assume they were young children. I would say I would say grade school age. Um, some as young as preschool, according to one movie, the 2010 remake. So those are your most famous um, serial killers in the slasher genre. Now, one also, I would say almost as, but not as famous serial killer that appears in a lot of films, some of them are horror, some of them are horror adjacent, is Hannibal Lecter. Now, Hannibal Lecter is unique in that he is a well educated individual. He's actually a doctor and a psychiatrist. He, from what I can tell from the movies I've seen, has a moral code, more or less, where he targets bad people, but he also will incidentally kill good people that get in his way. But he does have a loose ethical code, if not a moral code, in that he really only wants to rid the world of bad people. But that's not like he's not out to kill all the bad people, just those that cross his path. Um, he can be hands-on, but he can also be manipulative to get others to kill for him. So he is a very intelligent and very dangerous serial killer. He has made appearances in multiple films. I'm not even going to list them all. Some of which I'll review on Horror Trans, this channel. Some of which I won't because I don't consider them necessarily horror. Um, but I'll let you be the judge of that, which ones are which. Because, well, you'll know when I don't review it, but maybe I do review it, and you'll be like, huh, I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. The last serial killer I'm going to talk about that is fictional, because we're going to talk about some, uh, I'm not going to say real world serial killers that are in horror movies, but real world serial killers that have inspired or influenced horror movie killers. And the first one that I'm going to talk about, or well, the last one I'm going to talk about on the fictionalized side, I don't know the character's name, and I don't know if it was ever said, to be honest. And he could have been using an alias. It is Kevin Spacey's character in the crime serial killer thriller, almost horror, Seven. I gotta recline the chair because my knee hurts. Ugh. So, Seven, the killer in Seven, has a very specific motivation. He is using imagery from the seven deadly sins from Catholicism, even though he's, um, never mind. I don't want to get into it. From Catholicism, where he's basically trying to, he's not really punishing bad people necessarily, but he's using the deaths of certain specific individuals to tell a story, to make a political statement or a societal statement, with the intention of eventually getting captured by the by a specific detective who he has orchestrated the events in such a way to entice the detective to make him the final victim. In other words, enticing the detective to kill him so that he would be the last uh, victim, which would be the sin of revenge. Um, Spoilers, if you haven't seen the movie, which I have reviewed it, I believe. If I haven't, it's on the docket. He succeeds. Now, there are a bunch of real world serial killers that have influenced films and cinema and television shows. I'm not going to name them all. Ted Bundy is one. Um, uh, Gacy, the clown, I don't remember his full name, is another one. Um, Charles Manson is another one. But the most, I would say, influential is Ed Gein. Ed Gein has influenced or loosely influenced um, Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and Buffalo Bill from the aforementioned Silence of the Lambs, which is a movie that featured our previously discussed Hannibal Lecter. So Ed Gein, the most famous, well, two most famous serial killers that he inspired, loosely inspired, Norman Bates from the Psycho franchise, and Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, elements of Ed Gein can be seen in other serial killers, which I'm not going to discuss here because we're running out of time and it would take me a long time. And I'd have to do more research. Um, I do not know of any fictionalized films that have attempted to adapt the actual Ed Gein story in a historically accurate manner. Now, if they do exist, I don't know about them. But if they do exist, they probably fall under the category of true crime, which, as I've stated, I'm not a fan of. So that would not necessarily be a movie I would be interested in. other than I'm curious to see how closely he resembles those horror villains he inspired. The last famous real world serial killer that has also inspired some cinema that I do want to discuss has never been caught, to my knowledge, and has never been identified, to my knowledge. And this is the infamous Zodiac Killer. Now, there have been movies based on the Zodiac killings specifically, more or less loosely based on the true events, although they're fictionalized for film. The most famous, which came out just a few years ago, maybe 10 or so years ago, 15 years ago, thereabouts, called Zodiac. This is a movie that I do consider a horror thriller that I do intend to actually talk about on Horror Trans at some point. Because even though it is based on a real person or real events, because they've never actually caught nor identified the real Zodiac killer, you cannot say definitively this movie is based on real events or a true story. It's based on real murders and the real investigation loosely, but it's my understanding the filmmakers took considerable liberties all the way around. Because the slasher genre is my favorite branch of horror, there are a lot of other serial killers I could talk about. The guy from Slumber Party Massacre, the driller, the miner from My Bloody Valentine comes to mind, um, which is an example of a copycat, which I didn't discuss yet. That'll probably be a separate video or a separate topic, maybe. And there's so many others. Now I didn't mention. Now okay, I wanted to talk about Charles Lee Ray, but he should get his own video. Probably a horror icon video, which most of these guys will get horror icon videos anyways. But Charles Lee Ray, I just he does fit the framework of a serial killer, and like Freddy Krueger, he's fairly fantastical in that he's a possessed doll, but the character, oh well, Chucky is what the doll is referred to as. Charles Lee Ray is the name of the serial killer, or the Lakewood Strangler, as they call him in the movie. He is, I would say, of all the ones I mentioned, at least the fictionalized ones, I would say, not my personal favorite, that's Freddy Krueger. He's the most interesting. And that's because we know nothing about his motive. Nothing at all. We know what type of person he is. We know all about his personality. We know all about his method of killing and who he targets. He basically kills for the fun of it, the thrill, and he'll kill fucking anybody. He just doesn't care. He has no preference. In fact, he's the opposite of most killers who only kill people who get in his way. He literally only spares people who further him, who he can use or manipulate to help him or assist him. Everybody else is fair game. Also, he's the only one that has a currently running, consistent appearance in film and television and horror because he gets new movies and TV shows on a regular basis. That's all the time I have for today. You know how to find me on social media. Stay cool.